The events that will take place on February 13 and 14, 2026, in the snow-capped mountains of Davos, Switzerland, are not just another economic forum. Historians of the future will call these 2 days the turning point when American hegemony finally collapsed. It was not an invasion. It was not a nuclear war. It was something far more deadly for the empire. It was a public suicide in front of the eyes of the entire world. Donald Trump, the president of the most powerful military power in human history, stepped onto the stage before the world's financial elite, before the owners of capital, and delivered a 70-minute speech that plunged the audience into a deathly silence. Not a silence of admiration, but a silence of horror. He 4 times confused one sovereign country with another, insulted his closest allies with the vulgarity of a schoolyard bully, and uttered racist comments about African immigrants right to the faces of African leaders. He threatened to use excessive force to achieve his goals, but the most important thing was not what Trump said, but how the world responded. While Trump shouted, Mark Carney, the former head of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada, stood up and uttered the phrase that killed the American century. The order under U.S. leadership is over. China has become a more predictable partner than Washington. The world just publicly recognized what many had suspected in secret. The king is not just naked. The king is mad and dangerous. And for the first time in 80 years, the world decided to stop applauding and start building its own emergency exit. To understand the scale of this collapse, one must analyze the geographical confusion, because this is not a minor error, it is a symptom of the cognitive decay of the empire. Trump wants to buy Greenland. This has been his obsession since his first term. He needs strategic resources, control over the Arctic, classic imperialism. But during his speech, he confused Greenland with Iceland 4 times in a row. He literally said, Iceland has already cost us huge money. The audience looked at each other in bewilderment. Iceland is a sovereign state, a member of NATO, with a developed economy. Greenland is an autonomous territory of Denmark. Why is this important? Because it shows that the person who has the nuclear button and who wants to redraw the map of the world does not even know the current map. This is the arrogance of the empire in its terminal stage. I don't care what your name is. I only care about what I want to get from you. When an imperial leader cannot distinguish the country he wants to buy from a country that is his military ally, it demonstrates a total lack of preparation and respect. This is not strength, this is senile clumsiness. And the Chinese, Russians, and Indians were taking notes, laughing to themselves, watching as the superpower stumbles over its own shoelaces. But the comedy quickly turned into a diplomatic tragedy when Trump began to attack his own allies. Listen, an empire is held together not only by weapons, but also by alliances. Rome had allies, Great Britain had the Commonwealth, the United States had NATO, and the G7. In Davos, Trump took out a flamethrower and burned those bridges. He said directly in front of the Canadian Prime Minister, Canada lives thanks to the United States. They should be grateful. This is not diplomacy. This is the rhetoric of a barroom bully who extorts money from a shop owner for protection. This is a public humiliation. Moreover, he did this right after Canada signed trade agreements with China. Trump reacted with the fury of a rejected lover. If you are not mine, I will destroy you. But Canada is no longer afraid. Canada is diversifying. And then the racism, the materialistic and cruel racism. Trump called Somali immigrants in Minnesota thugs, pirates, and people of low intelligence. He said this at the World Economic Forum, where delegations from Nigeria, South Africa, and Ethiopia were present. What message does this send to the global South? It tells them, for the United States, you are not partners, you are subhumans. While China builds ports in Africa and receives African leaders with red carpets, even if out of commercial interests, the United States insults them to their faces. This is the destruction of soft power. The United States can no longer convince anyone that they are the moral lighthouse of the world. That lighthouse has gone out. And finally, the threat toward military technologies. Trump attacked Israel, his most faithful ally. He said, "Stop taking credit for the Iron Dome. That is our technology." Even the protégés are reminded who the master is here. This is the empire devouring its own children. Friends, this was not an accidental communication failure. From the perspective of historical materialism, this is what happens when an empire loses its economic superiority, when you can no longer dominate the market because China is overtaking you in production. You resort to threats, insults, and force. Trump's speech in Davos was a cry of despair from the American ruling class, which knows it has lost control over the future, and all it has left is intimidation of the present. But the most exciting thing is that intimidation no longer works. If the confusion between Greenland and Iceland was a symptom of the empire's senile dementia, then the tariff threat that Trump launched in Davos is a symptom of its desperate violence. And here, materialistic analysis becomes critically important. Empires do not impose duties against their allies when they are strong and competitive. They do it when they are weak, inefficient, and frightened. Let's talk about the weapon of despair, 25% tariffs. During his speech, Trump did not limit himself to talk about the climate or artificial intelligence. He looked into the eyes of delegations from 8 European countries, NATO allies, historical trade partners, and held a gun to their heads. He announced an escalation of tariffs from 10 to 25% on their goods. The pretext, they said something bad about him. They did not stop buying American goods. No, the official reason was that these countries participated in NATO exercises that Trump did not like, or they did not pay enough. The pretext changes every hour, but Marxist analysis tells us, follow the money. The material reality is that the American economy has lost competitiveness. It can no longer produce cars better than the Germans. It can no longer produce luxury items better than the French or the Italians. It can no longer compete in the field of high precision equipment. When you cannot win on the free market that you yourself invented, what do? You flip the board. Trump uses tariffs not to protect American industry, which has already been largely dismantled, but for the extortion of tribute. This is a mafia tax. This means saying to Europe, if you want to sell in my market, pay me an imperial tribute of 25%. This destroys the social contract of the West. For 70 years, the deal was this. The United States provides military security, and Europe opens its markets. Trump tore up that contract in Davos. He said, pay for security separately, and also, I will close my market. This is the end of the Atlantic Alliance as an economic entity. But here is what is historic. In the past, when the American emperor threatened, Europe bowed its head and submitted. In Davos 2026, Europe said no. For the first time in modern history, the European Union activated what they call the trade bazooka. What is it? It is an automatic legal mechanism that allows Brussels to take immediate, asymmetrical, and painful retaliatory measures against any country that tries to economically coerce a member state. The message from European leaders in the corridors of Davos was chilling for Washington. If you set a tariff of 25% for us, we will set a tariff of 50% on your technology, your soybeans, and your natural gas. And we will buy these things from Brazil or China. Boom. This is the sound of the destruction of hegemony. Europe no longer sees the United States as a big brother protector. It sees them as a systemic risk. It sees an unstable, dangerous, and predatory partner. And the material proof of this is the agreement between Mercosur and the European Union. For 20 years, this agreement was stalled because Europe preferred to look north. Now they are accelerating the agreement with South America. Why? Because they desperately need to diversify their supply chains away from the United States. Europe is disconnecting from the United States. They are looking to the global south, to Brazil, Argentina, and India for what they used to seek in Washington. And this brings us to the most revealing moment of the entire summit, to the moment when the ideology of the free world officially died and was replaced by pure capitalist realism. Let's talk about Mark Carney. This man is not a leftist, radical, not a revolutionary. He is the former head of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada. He is the embodiment of the Western financial establishment. He is a man of money. And this man stepped onto the stage immediately after Trump's disaster and dropped an ideological nuclear bomb. He said, "We are in the middle of a rupture, not a transition. The old order will not return." But the phrase that made Chinese bankers smile and American diplomats turn pale was this: China has become a more predictable partner than the United States. Stop for a second to process this. Capital hates uncertainty. Capital is cowardly. What Mark Carney is saying is that between the chaotic and vengeful democracy of Trump and the planned and stable autocracy of Xi Jinping, capital prefers Xi Jinping. Carney just admitted that the United States has turned into a banana republic with nuclear weapons. A place where the rules change depending on the leader's mood, where contracts are torn up on a whim, where geography is confused and allies are insulted. China, by contrast, offers 5-year plans, offers contracts for 20 years, offers stability. In the logic of historical materialism, capital always flows to where it can reproduce itself with the greatest security. And Davos 2026 was the moment when Western capital recognized that the United States is no longer that safe place. And Carney did not only speak, he acted. He revealed that Canada is conducting negotiations for deep agreements with China. This explains Trump's fury and his phrase, "Canada lives thanks to us." Trump feels that his backyard is rebelling. But Canada, guided by the ideological leadership of figures like Carney, is making a calculation for survival. If we remain tied only to the United States, we will drown along with them. We must turn toward Asia. This is the desertion of the lieutenants. When Canada, the most obedient partner, the most integrated neighbor, starts looking for other options, you know that the empire is in a terminal phase. Let's analyze the psychology of Trump's threat. Trump said, "Probably we will achieve nothing if I don't decide to use excessive force where we will be unstoppable." This phrase should be in all history textbooks. Excessive force, unstoppable. Whom is he threatening? Greenland, because it doesn't want to be sold. Mexico, Canada. When a political leader is forced to resort to an explicit threat of military violence to achieve economic or territorial goals, like buying an island, he admits that he has lost all legitimacy. Real hegemonistic power is invisible. It is when others do what you want because they believe it is better for them. A power that must shout, "I am unstoppable," and threaten excessive force is a fragile, paranoid, and declining power. This is King Lear shouting at the storm. And the BRICS countries know this. In Davos, the delegations of Brazil, India, China, and South Africa were not afraid. They were taking notes. For BRICS, Trump's speech was the best propaganda gift. They no longer need to convince the world that the United States is dangerous. The United States walks onto the stage and shouts about it into the microphone. The BRICS narrative that we need a multipolar world to protect ourselves from the arbitrariness of the dollar, and Washington was 100% confirmed by Trump. Every insult to a Somali, every threat to a European, every geographical confusion was another brick in the construction of the wall that the global South is erecting to separate itself from the North. Look at the reaction of the markets. While Trump was speaking, what happened to the dollar? It faltered. What happened to gold? It rose. Investors heard the 25% tariffs and excessive force and ran to safe assets that are not dollars. They see that the economic policy of the United States for the coming years will be inflation, protectionism, and conflicts, and no one wants to hold their money in the middle of this fire. The rupture mentioned by Carney is not theoretical, it is material. Supply chains are breaking, data flows are breaking, mutual defense treaties are breaking. What Davos showed is that the world is reorganizing around the United States, like water flows around a stone in a river. They no longer try to move the stone. They simply flow around it and go their own way. Europe with Mercosur, Canada with China, Africa with India. Everyone is looking for routes that do not pass through Donald Trump's customs. And I want you to think about what this means for the working class in the United States and in the West. Trump sells these tariffs as protection for the worker. This is a cruel lie. When you break trade relations with your allies and make imports 25% more expensive, who pays for that? You do. The price of your coffee, your car, your clothes, your medicines, everything rises. European retaliatory measures, the bazooka, will close markets for American exports. Factories will close, farmers will lose their contracts. This economic war will not be fought by the millionaires of Davos. They have private jets and accounts in Switzerland. This war will be paid for by a working family in Ohio, Michigan, Lyon, and Manchester with inflation and unemployment. This is the bill for imperial collapse, and it is always handed to the poorest. To understand the depth of the abyss that opened in Davos, one must stop looking at the main stage where Trump was putting on his show and start looking at the back corridors, the private meeting rooms, where the real future of the planet was being decided. Because while the United States was shouting threats, the rest of the world was signing the divorce. Trump's comment about Somali thugs and low intelligence was not just a racist slip. It was a strategic error of historic proportions. From a materialistic point of view, Africa is not a continent for charity. It is the demographic and resource engine of the 21st century. In Africa, there are critical minerals: cobalt, coltan, lithium, without which there is no energy transition, no artificial intelligence, and no modern military industry. By 2050, Africa will have the largest young workforce in the world, while the West and China are aging. When the President of the United States stands before the world elite and insults Africans with 19th century stereotypes, he hands the continent to China on a silver platter. Xi Jinping doesn't need to do anything. He doesn't need to spend a yuan on propaganda. He simply needs to play the video of Trump in Lagos, Addis Ababa, Nairobi. China offers infrastructure, loans, even if burdensome, and diplomatic treatment as equals, at least on the surface. The United States offers insults and moral lectures. In Davos, African leaders realized that under the American umbrella, there is only contempt. The material consequence will be the acceleration of Africa's integration into BRICS. We will see more African countries refuse American military bases and accept Chinese ports. This is the loss of an entire continent due to the verbal incontinence of a leader who does not understand that the world is no longer white and no longer Western. And this brings us to the myth of American autarky. Trump threatens to close the United States market to erect tariff walls. His thesis is that the United States is self-sufficient, an island that doesn't need the world. Marxist economic analysis destroys this illusion in seconds. The United States deindustrialized 40 years ago. Their supply chains are globally integrated. If Trump carries out his threat and applies 25% tariffs to Europe and blocks China, who produces the antibiotics consumed in Chicago hospitals? China and India. Who produces high-precision components for Detroit's cars? Germany and Japan. Who processes uranium for American nuclear power plants? Russia and allies. By declaring a trade war on everyone simultaneously, allies and rivals, Trump declares a self-blockade. It is as if an army besieged its own city and cut its own supplies of water and food. The excessive force Trump speaks of will not be used against external enemies. It will be felt in internal inflation. It will be felt in the shortage of goods on the shelves of Walmart. The empire is strangling itself, believing it is strangling others. And I want to touch on an important point: the psychology of the leader. Trump said, "They used to call me daddy." I went from leading this to being a terrible person. This phrase, uttered at an economic forum, reveals a pathological need for personal validation mixed with resentment. The foreign policy of a superpower is no longer based on rational national interests, such as access to resources or security. It is based on the narcissistic wound of one man. If I am not applauded, I burn down the theater. We have come to the finale of this journey into the heart of imperial darkness. We have seen the geographical confusion, the racism, the betrayal of allies, and the rebellion of Europe. But the question hanging in the air is what next? What does the diplomatic suicide of the United States mean for the future of civilization, and more importantly, for your lives? The materialistic conclusion is clear. Davos 2026 became the official funeral of the unipolar order. It did not die in a naval battle in the Pacific Ocean. It did not die due to the collapse of the dollar to zero in one morning. It died because the leader of the system stepped onto the stage and demonstrated that he no longer has the mental, moral, or political capacity to lead. When the hegemon becomes the main source of instability, the system self-liquidates. For the countries of the global south, for Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, this opens the biggest historical opportunity in 80 years. For decades, we were told there is only one way: Washington. Today, thanks to Trump's aggressive clumsiness, the path is cleared for active non-alignment. Small countries no longer have to be on their knees. They can negotiate. They can say to the United States, if you impose tariffs, I will sell to China. They can say to China, if you set debt traps, I will buy technology from Europe. The fragmentation of power creates space for maneuver. This is the moment for geopolitical cunning. Leaders who understand this, like Lula in Brazil or Modi in India, will benefit. Those who continue to wait for instructions from a White House that confuses Iceland with Greenland will drown with the ship. But do not be deceived about the price. The birth of a multipolar world will be chaotic, inflationary, and dangerous. The American peace, with all its crimes and hypocrisy, guaranteed a certain predictable trade flow. The new world will be a world of closed blocks, broken supply chains, and higher prices. The working class will pay the price of this transition at the supermarket checkout. The efficiency of globalization is dead. Welcome to the security of protectionism. And security costs money. However, in all this, there is revolutionary hope. Trump's speech in Davos destroyed the mystique of power. For a long time, we believed that the elites of Washington were geniuses of four-dimensional chess, that they knew things we didn't know. To see the President of the United States mutter incoherence, racist slurs, and empty threats frees us from this inferiority complex. We understand that the Emperor is not only naked, he is lost. And when nations lose fear of the Empire loses its only real weapon. The threat of excessive force no longer frightens. It only confirms weakness. A strong empire buys loyalty. A weak empire threatens to break legs, and the world no longer tolerates barroom bullies. Mark Carney was right. We are in a rupture. The old world, where the United States dictated and the rest obeyed, died on the 21st of January, 2026, in the Swiss snows. A new world, where China is more predictable, where Europe defends itself with trade bazookas, and where the global South demands respect, has just been born. It is a more dangerous world, yes, but it is a more real world. A world where the contradictions of capitalism can no longer be hidden under the carpet of American hegemony. Do not mourn the old order. It was an order that brought us extreme inequality, the climate crisis, and endless wars. Let it burn, and from its ashes, perhaps, just perhaps, we will have a chance to build something that does not depend on the whims of one person in one capital, but on the necessary cooperation of a planet that refuses to be anyone's private property. Hegemony is dead. Long live history.